Hey guys, what is up? It is me, Pagey here, once again with another video on DC films. In this case, it's the animated DC film side because part 2 of, well, not just Crisis on Infinite Earths, but Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths, the movie set within the Tomorrowverse animated movie universe. Well, it's now come out. It came out probably a few days ago from when you're watching this video, but I'm just getting around to reviewing it right now. Now, I'm not necessarily going to be doing like major spoilers, but I am just going to talk about the movie, so it probably helps if you've watched it, but at the same time I won't specifically spoil every little bit. It's just like the general like structure of the film, if that makes sense, in regards to how I talk about it and what I liked and didn't like. And in regards to like this being part 2, part 1 I really enjoyed. Like, I thought it was a really well put together film, especially for a part 1 and setting up the story and getting you interested in seeing what happens next and everything like that. But I was very curious to see how part 2 would be handled because I wasn't too sure how much of the story they were going to put in this. And to be honest, it's not a ridiculous amount of the story. They're definitely leaving a lot of what happens in Crisis and even some of the major big moments probably for part 3, but at the same time I don't know what they're removing from the story and what they're keeping from the story in part 3. It's like one of the things I'm not too sure about. I don't think a trailer's come out for part 3 yet. They might leave that for another couple of months, or at least another couple of weeks maybe, and then maybe a month. I'm not too sure. It's up to them, when they release that trailer. But yeah, I'm just curious to see what they do there based off this second part. Now, in regards to whether I like this more than part 1, the answer is no. Like, this movie is, or this second part of the Crisis on Infinite Earths movie event, it's definitely a step back or a downgrade from part 1. Part 1 I thought was really damn good. Not perfect, but very enjoyable. This one, not so much. That doesn't mean it's all bad. It's just, if you were going into it thinking it was going to be on the level of part 1, you're definitely going to be disappointed. I definitely didn't go into it thinking that, but at the same time I felt like it's not great, if that makes sense. But of course, if you've seen it, let me know in the comment section down below what you thought about the film. Will you be sticking around for part 3, everything like that? And of course, if you're going to enjoy the video, drop a like. It takes 2 seconds. So I'm just going to say what I didn't necessarily like about this movie as a whole before I just jump into some of the things that caught my interest, which maybe involve the spoilery stuff as well. I think the thing I didn't really like about this movie, this second part, is that not a lot happens. Like, it's very, I don't want to say anticlimactic. It's just that there's not a lot happening in this film. But at the same time, you're still jumping around in this film as if a lot is happening. Like, a lot of this movie is backstory stuff and really setting up, I think, purely like the Anti-Monitor, and then I guess some of the stuff that we'll see in part 3, which I'm not too surprised that part 2 ended up just being almost a setup of sorts for part 3. I felt like that might have been the case, especially from what we saw in the, I think it was only 2 trailers that they released for this second part. It almost felt like that was going to be the case. But at the same time, seeing it play out, you just felt a bit disappointed and a bit shortchanged that this is what they, put out there for a standalone thing. I think that's probably the biggest issue I have, is that they've put this out there. It costs, especially in this economy, it costs, it's definitely overpriced for what it is. And it doesn't really feel like it's worth it. It feels like you're getting like half of something. And I know this is a second of a 3-part event, but part 1 felt like its own thing. It felt like its own story and it was worth the purchase. Part 2 doesn't. Like, I'm pretty disappointed by that. So yeah, it just feels like there's a bit of like shortchanging going on. It just doesn't feel like there's a lot going on at the same time. But at the same time, alongside that, there is there's still some, might I say, interesting stuff going on that I think makes it worth viewing, but maybe you should just rent it for cheap. Maybe wait till it goes down in price, or other methods, whichever way you want to go about things, which I'll talk about right now. Some of that good stuff that I at least found interesting and enjoyable. So a lot of this, well, not a lot of it, but definitely the first half of this film, there's a lot of backstory, and you could tell from the trailers what this backstory was going to be, and that was revolving around the Supergirl and the Monitor relationship. Like, how did Supergirl end up working for the Monitor? Because in part 1, we found out that Harbinger wasn't Lila Michaels like it is in the comics and the story there, but it's actually Supergirl. So like, well, what's happened there? What's the change there? This, movie explains that, explains how they came to interact, and also some of the dynamics there, which I thought was pretty interesting and I think made sense. I don't know necessarily if we had to spend that much time around it, but it also makes some of the climactic stuff at the end worthwhile, and it feels a bit more heavy, especially leading into part 3 and some of the events that might play out there as well. So I think it was worth the backstory at the same time, but as I said, like, it jumps around a bit, so it might put some people off. And the other backstory, which was pretty evident that we're going to get in the trailer, was around Psycho Pirate, or Charles Halstead or Holstead, whichever way you want to pronounce it, and his backstory where he originated on Earth 2. And, you know, they sort of like speed run it, I guess, in regards to the different interactions he's had, and they sort of even like just verbalize it in regards to stuff that he's done, which I was fine with. But they did a really good job, this isn't a spoiler because it's pretty much shown in part 1 that this would have been the case, but they do a good job, I think, showing these backstories, explaining them, and maybe why certain people do certain things, and then they connect because Harbinger, aka Supergirl, then recruits Psycho Pirate for the Monitor to be a part of this team, and then it sets up some of the shenanigans that go on in this individual film as well. And that's not a spoiler saying that she recruits him, because how do you think he got there in part 1? We saw him get onto the ship. But yeah, I think that's definitely the standout part of this film, and it's probably the most intriguing and interesting, is following those backstories and everything like that. Though it does jump around, I was a bit confused in the first 5 minutes exactly what was happening, because something happens, without saying what it is, something happens in the present day, and then we just jump all this time back, and they don't really classify. And also, I've noticed throughout this film, the 2 ones, they're not showing what Earth they're on, so you sort of have to maybe really listen to the dialogue to see if they say a specific Earth. And sometimes they're pretty damn obvious. They say like Earth 17 multiple times, but they don't show something on the bottom, which I wish they did. I mean, this isn't any this is like some of the animated stuff never does. They do that all the time. Like, I think Young Justice used to do it all the time. I wish they did that, but maybe they just felt like they didn't need to, or it wasn't important. But I wish sometimes they did that just so we could keep track of where we were. But maybe that's for us to pay more attention. I don't know. But yeah, that's the main stuff, that backstory stuff. And then there's also just pretty much the antimatter and the lead up to the anti-monitor stuff. In regards to the anti-monitor's look, this wasn't in any of the trailers, so I guess this is a bit of a spoiler, but I think this is what his final look's going to be. I don't know if we're going to get a different look for him, or a different design, but that's what he looks like, at least in this film. I'm fine with it. I've seen people complaining if that's anti-monitor's final look, then it doesn't work. If that is his final look, I'm fine with it. I don't really care, as long as he doesn't look like Kirby, I don't know, something like that. I don't know, I don't really care too much. As long as he looks like some threatening force, then I'm fine with it. But I felt like the way that they, set up some stuff from the comics involving Psycho Pirate and Supergirl, well, not saying Supergirl specifically, but because she's playing that Harbinger role, I think worked. I didn't really have too many issues with it. I think the thing that people might have issues with is some of the stuff that maybe just feels specific for this, like maybe some of the Bat Family stuff people might not be with, and also this part of the storyline that's focused on this movie does involve some of the inner conflicts that's being forced upon the heroes. So some of the Civil War moments, if you want to put it, where you have a hero fighting hero, and I don't think I think maybe they could have done a better job with that. I didn't really have it wasn't like this massive issue, but I feel like it could have been done a bit better. And also, for a big multiverse thing, this is something that I think most people, if you've watched it, you would agree with. There is a lack of characters. Even though we are having this massive multiverse thing, it's very limited characters, which I think is maybe the point of concern when I was watching it. Can we have more? Can we have more? And I'm assuming it's a budgetary thing, whether like voice actors and stuff like that, because they've got some voice actors here that they've done massive roles, whether it's in this Tomorrowverse or other DC animated things in the past, and they have hardly any lines. And it's is that a budget thing? I'm not too sure, but I feel like I sort of wanted more there, seeing it was the multiverse aspect, and a lot of these heroes hadn't died yet. They're just standing there. A lot of the time they're just standing there. They might do some stuff, but you don't hear them talk, and I wouldn't mind interacting with them. Now, there is I won't spoil it specifically, because I don't think it was really teased necessarily too much in any of the trailers for this, though I think based off part 1 you'd assume this character would show up. But in the first part, they had a different voice actor listed to be voicing this character that was not revealed to be the real character that they are. It was someone else. They put him in the credits as someone else voicing them. But then that voice actor you would expect this character to be voiced by is now in this movie. And I was like, why did they fool us in the first one? I don't know if it was someone else voicing him, just doing an impression. I'm not too sure. But you know what? I'll just say it's a spoiler in 1, 2, 3. John Constantine is, the homeless guy is then revealed to be John Constantine, which was obvious. In part 1, it was it's obviously John Constantine. But in part 1, it didn't have Matt Ryan listed as the voice actor for the I think they just called him like the mystery man or homeless man. I'm not too sure what they called him, but it's Matt Ryan voicing him in this second part. So I don't know if that was an intentional hiding sort of thing, or it was someone in part 1 doing an impression. So it wasn't obvious it was Constantine. I don't know. But anyway, he is playing like sort of like the same version from the previous universe, like the Flashpoint created universe and stuff like that. So more of him in part 3, I guess. But it was cool to have him back. But yeah, I think I think this is a bit messy, this second part, and it's definitely not as good as the first part. Like, I definitely recommend watching. If I had to recommend which part to watch just on its own, it'd definitely be part 1. It just works on its own and in a self-contained way. I think this second part, as I said, while not being the best and being a bit messy, I think it sets up part 3 pretty well. I'm very intrigued to see what they do there, without spoiling exactly what happens at the end. While it also leaves it a bit open as well, like there could be something that happens at the beginning of 3 that changes it up a bit at the same time. But I guess we're led to assume that something happens there, like one specific thing that most people would be thinking does happen. But I'm very intrigued to see what they do on part 3 and how it evolves from this, and any surprises they have in part 3. Like Batman Beyond's in this, but we're led to, like, we've been told that Kevin Conroy is voicing his Batman, the animated version, in part 3. So I'm assuming in part 3, that's where some of these animated cameos might appear. So yeah, I'm interested to see what they do there. But overall, I'm not going to say I didn't like it. It was just a bit disappointing compared to part 1 and maybe what I wanted this to be. But at the same time, it sort of did what I thought it would be. Like, it would tell those backstories like the trailers did tease, while also pretty much being set up for part 3 and what happens there. So yeah, it's just a mixed bag. That's the best way to put it. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, it'd be awesome if you could drop a like and it shows support. Let me know in the comment section down below your various opinions and everything we went over in this video. You're going to watch this film. If you've already watched it, what'd you think? Out of 10, out of 5, what would you give it? I don't know, let me know. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later. Goodbye.